may take a seat if you figured that out. Well, I'm going to just have a brief prayer with you, and then we're going to be reading from John chapter 2, and you'll be able to follow along on the screens. Father, you desire that we would taste and see your goodness. And we ask, Lord, that we'd be able to enter in these moments into a deeper experience and knowledge of you. Be pleased to open our hearts and minds. Lord, help us to focus and concentrate and to let go of all the thoughts we might have about later today or this week or what happened this morning or last week. Help us just to be able to listen to you now. In Jesus' name, amen. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Well, we're looking at John's gospel, his biography of Jesus. It's his eyewitness account of his own encounters with Jesus. And the account is both selective and reflective. And by selective, I mean that John's not trying to reproduce and cover all the things that are in the other Gospels. He's not trying to be comprehensive. In fact, his Gospel was written significantly after the other 3. And it's reflective because what John's doing is he's looking back. And we have this experience, don't we? You know, we look back at things that happened years ago, and we just have a different perspective on it. We see things that we didn't see before. And that's what John's doing. Some things that didn't seem as significant at the moment actually have become far more significant. And so he writes in light of that. And John uses 2 words here that just command our attention as we hear this passage. And the first is the word signs. John uses the word signs for what the other Gospels usually call miracles. The other Gospels are drawing from a couple of words in Greek, the original language, that come from either the word power or from a word that means wonder. And John's use of signs is very, very important because signs point, right? We have a lot of signage around the building. It points you to places, but you know, the signs about New Life aren't New Life Church. This is New Life Church. So signs point to something. The sign isn't the thing in and of itself. It points to another reality. And what John's saying is that these signs, these things that Jesus does, point to a deeper reality than the deed itself. So turning water into wine isn't just something that's amazing, although of course it is. It's not a magic trick. It's not just a demonstration of power that, well, might intimidate or impress. No, it's to reveal something. And then the other word John uses here is arche, and it's a word that can mean first in a sequence. This is the first of 7 signs that John will describe in his gospel. But it also can mean first in importance, that it's primary. And John intends us to understand that both meanings are in view. Why does that matter? Well, it's because this sign tells us who Jesus is and what Christianity is all about. Now, there are many reasons why you might reject Jesus. You might say, he's just not for me. And I want to be sure if that's where you're coming from or that's what you've done, that it's really you have a valid reason, because by that I mean it really fits who he is. But a lot of people reject Jesus and Christianity because, well, they have a misunderstanding. They have the wrong impression about who he is. This opening, this is the first moments in Jesus' public ministry. I'm just going to move this because I just am losing part of my audience here. Let's see if that'll work, if I won't bump into it too much. This is the first moments of his public ministry. It's his public preview, if you will. Now, we're very used to this sort of thing. You know, when a company launches itself, it launches a new product or a new service or an organization is born, well, a lot of thought's given to how you're going to start that, about how you're actually going to come out and let people know that you exist. You know, I have in my wallet a number of business cards, and that's the same sort of thing. It's a first impression piece. You give it to somebody when you meet them. It tells you who you are, what you do, and what you might expect. And that's what this text is we're reading. This act of turning water into wine does all those things. But when you view it in this light, it seems like it's really strange. You know, of all the things Jesus is going to do in the Gospels, why this? I mean, why not do something that's headline grabbing, like feeding 5,000 people from a little boy's lunch, or raising someone from the dead? That would really, you know, get things out and go out big, right? But instead, there's this sign. And actually, only the servants and Jesus' disciples know it's even taken place. So what's up with this? Why is this the first sign that Jesus does? Well, John tells us that this sign does 2 things. It reveals Jesus' glory and engenders faith. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of his signs, first in sequence and first of importance, of primary, through which he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. Here it is that we see the fullness, actually, of who Jesus is and what Christianity's all about. You've got to stop and think about this, because a lot of people think Christianity is a narrow, demanding, dour, negative thing. That Jesus or God is kind of a killjoy. And actually, the very first appearance is at a party, and Jesus makes a lot of wine for this party. He's not exactly what you might think he is. Now, Jesus and his mother, as well as his disciples, are invited to attend a wedding. And there's a note in here that it's on the 3rd day, and that's the 3rd day after Jesus encounters Nathanael. It's part of, from all the way from chapter 1 to here, 7 days. It's a complete week in the life of Jesus. And that the guest list includes both Jesus and his mother, suggests that it was the wedding of a relative. And it very well may be, because of what we see Mary doing here, that she had some responsibilities in helping put this feast on. Now, what you might not know is that weddings then are a little different than weddings today. A typical wedding in the first century in Palestine would last at least 3 days. It might last an entire week. In a small village, people would just stop. They would stop life. They would stop working, and they would just party for a week. And unlike weddings in our time, it's the groom who's responsible to pick up the tab and not the parents of the bride. And what happens here is that they run out of wine. And this is a major problem. Why they ran out of wine, we're not told. We're not told whether, more guests than expected came, or the wine delivery truck broke down, or they just didn't buy enough, or they might have been just too poor to afford enough. And at that time and place, hospitality was one of the highest expectations. It was one of the highest values that people had for one another. And so to fail to provide for your guests wasn't just like a little mishap, it was a disaster. Because for this young couple, this moment of their wedding, this feast was probably the highest and greatest celebration of their lives. And it was on the verge of becoming a moment of public humiliation and shame. And Mary's sensitive to this. She realizes what's about to unfold for them, and she turns to her firstborn son, Jesus, for assistance. Now, you need to understand that Mary's husband, Joseph, appears in none of the Gospels. He's undoubtedly died. And she has undoubtedly done what any widowed mother with a family would do. She turns to her firstborn son for both financial and emotional support. And so it's just natural for her to turn to him in this moment, which perhaps she also shared in some obligations for. And as we read the conversation, we're just perplexed by it. It's a really strange conversation. And the translations kind of soften what's being said here. The text we read puts it this way: "Woman, why do you involve me?" It actually literally reads this way: "What to me and you, woman?" Now, if you were a mom and one of your children addressed you as woman, you would not feel a lot of warmth or connection as a result of that. It's pretty off-putting. It comes across as harsh or rude to us, and it is an action, a word. It's not one of the words for mother or family. It's a word that conveys distance. Jesus is distancing himself from Mary. And then he adds another strange word. He says, "It's not my hour." Now, the word hour in John's Gospel is a technical term. It refers to the hour of his death. Here's just a few verses from the Gospel later on. "So they were seeking to arrest Jesus, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. No one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. Now is my soul troubled," Jesus says, "and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this very purpose I've come to this hour. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." So when Jesus talks about the hour, he means the hour of his destiny. And his destiny is to go to the cross. And so it's the hour in which he is crucified. It's that moment in time. And so what Jesus is doing here, if we put all this together, he's giving Mary a rebuke. He's creating distance because he's saying to her, my obligations to my Father in the mission he's given to me supersede any obligations I might have to family, to you. Or this way: Mother, you have no claim on me. My Father has a claim on me. He has given me a mission. This is the reason that I've come into the world. And then what really happened, you would think that's the end, right? That Jesus would just walk away, she'd be crushed, but that's not what happens. He turns around in a few minutes and he does something about it. Just think about this. Jesus seemingly gives his mother the brush off about the wine, and then he takes care of the problem. What in the world is going on here? Well, in this strange conversation, Mary's asking her very resourceful son Jesus to do something so the wedding isn't a disaster. And Jesus answers with really cryptic words about some hour, his destiny. Just what is being said here? What are we supposed to gather from this? Well, we're going to see this kind of thing happen again and again in John's gospel, and it goes something like this. In this case, it's Mary who is speaking on a very mundane level about wine. But Jesus detects something deeper. He sees something deeper here. He sees and thinks about wine as a metaphor, as a picture, as a symbol of something else. Mary wants the wedding to go on without embarrassment, and Jesus is thinking about what the prophets have written about the coming of the Messianic kingdom. Wine is going to flow freely when the Messianic kingdom comes. Isaiah puts it this way: on this mountain the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. Or Jeremiah says, and they will come and shout for joy on the heights of Zion. They will rejoice in the bounty of the Lord, the grain and the new wine and the olive oil, the young flocks and herds. It will be like a well-watered garden, and they will sorrow no more. And Hosea, and the people will dwell again in his shade. That's God's shade. They'll be in his presence. And they will flourish like the grain. They will blossom like the vine. And Israel's fame will be like the wine of Lebanon. Wine is a symbol throughout the Old Testament for God's lavish, abundant giving. Sometimes we use the word blessing. That's what a blessing is. It's a lavish, abundant gift that God bestows on his people. And this connects to the wedding because Jesus will consistently say, and the Bible picks up on this, that the wedding is a symbol for the consummation of the Messianic age. So the miracle in turning water into wine is actually an enacted parable. Of course, Mary doesn't realize she's caught up in this enacted parable, this enacted story. But the miracle anticipates the Messianic feast, actually the wedding supper of the Lamb, as well as it reveals beyond itself the cross. Now, the cross comes into play by a detail that might seem inconsequential to you, but it's on Jesus' mind as he thinks about his mission, because he's thinking about his mission. It's the hour. It's the hour when he's thinking about the hour when he's going to do something to bring about a wedding. And it's the 6 stone jars that's significant. These jars are jars for ritual cleansing, for ceremonial cleansing. Now, you and I, if you've been raised properly, wash our hands when we go to the restroom before we have a meal. We do that, to have, get the dirt off our hands. And actually, we all probably bought into the germ theory of disease. And so we think it's hygienic to wash our hands. But this washing is for a religious reason. It has nothing to do with germs. It has nothing to do really with dirt. It has to do with being able to be in the presence of God. You have to be spiritually clean to be in God's presence. And this ritual was a way of reminding yourself that you needed to be clean to be in the presence of God. Now remember, this miracle is a sign that points to a greater reality. And it's this, that Jesus on the cross is going to provide a spiritual cleansing, an actual cleansing from sin that makes it possible for us to be in the presence of God. Water's not enough to clean you up to be in God's presence. But what Jesus accomplishes on the cross actually is. And Jesus, as he commands these jars to be filled, and they're filled to the very brim, he's going to, in a moment of time, turn 120 to 150 gallons of water into the finest and choicest of wines. This is the glory of Jesus' mission, that his death is going to provide abundant cleansing for everything that stands between us and God. Just think about shame. Shame's that sense you have that you don't measure up, that you're really not adequate. You don't have what it takes in life. You can't meet other people's expectations. Sometimes people heap shame on us, and sometimes, well, we just do stuff and we bring it upon ourselves. That's what's going to happen to this young family, this young couple. They're going to experience shame if the situation in the feast doesn't change. There's our past. Our past, our shame and our past stand in the way of being close to God. We just can't go into his presence because we've either ignored him or we've actively resisted him. And then there's just everything that's unworthy and impure that keeps us from entering the presence of a God who's utterly pure. Everything that stands between us and God is resolved and removed and cleansed through the power of the cross. And so turning water into wine reveals the glory of Jesus' mission. Jesus is going to open the way for us to experience God as we were intended always to. The sign of water being transformed into wine also reveals the glory of a new creation. John begins his gospel by announcing that Jesus is in fact the creator, that he was there in the very beginning, and through him all things were made, and nothing that was made has been made. And this sign reveals this truth, because only God could turn water into wine. No one else could possibly do that. Now, some of you are thinking, well, hasn't science proved there's no miracles? After all, science gives us a full explanation of how the universe works. And so we don't really need any other explanation. We don't need God and religion and miracles and all of that. Now, this is widely accepted as true. And people who say this, not all of them really understand the limitations of science itself. And what they're really telling you, what they're really communicating by this is they have taken a position, which is really a kind of faith, that just simply says miracles and God don't exist. Actually, they just say they couldn't possibly exist, and this is a philosophical position called naturalism. And it just holds that the only things that are real are matter and energy and time. And there's nothing else. It can't prove this, but it asserts this. There is no God, there are no spiritual beings, therefore there are no miracles. Case shut and closed. But if you were to sit in a philosophy class, just philosophy 101, you would come to realize there is a logical fallacy in this argument. And although it has a fancy name, here's what it amounts to. What my net doesn't catch ain't fish. And they've constructed a net that says the only things that are real are material. And therefore anything that's unmaterial, they just can't possibly exist. Naturalism can't explain what love and beauty are. And although they may be hard for us to describe, we actually know there are things that are beautiful. And we want to love and we want to be loved. It can't explain the purpose or meaning of life. It can't explain why it is that we want to make life better. And it doesn't help us understand why it is that we should bother to treat people with kindness or respect. We just have to infer it's in our best interest to do that. But it doesn't explain why that would be the case. Naturalism simply can't prove that God doesn't exist. It just declares it. It's a tenet of its faith, or if you want a more philosophical word, it's a presupposition. In his book, and this is a really interesting book I read last year, Infinite Power, How Calculus Reveals the Secrets of the Universe. And Steve Strogatz is an applied mathematician who teaches at Cornell. And he just like opened up an understanding of calculus. I had a little bit of calculus. I got to engineering calculus, but that was the end of my mathematical education. And he wanted to say, calculus is this great tree, and pretty much all the rest of mathematics is a branch off of it. And then in basically lay terms, I didn't get too lost in the book, he explains how that calculus opens up all kinds of things. In fact, it explains really how the universe works. And toward the end of the book, he admits he doesn't have any idea why this would be so. It's just a coincidence. That's what he concludes. Christian physicist and MIT professor Ian Hutchinson notes, most of us really don't understand the Bible's view of miracles. And it's simply this, that God upholds everything that exists, every molecule, every wave of light, every galaxy, the entire universe, moment by moment. And if he stopped thinking about it, it would simply cease to exist. And so what that means is really everything's a miracle. That I can open my hand and close it, that's a miracle. That's the Bible's perspective. It's really very different than ours. And so here's how he defines a miracle. It's an extraordinary act of God by which he upholds the universe in a different manner than he does normally. Oh, sure, we know more than people did a long time ago. And we seem to know what makes the universe work, but that knowledge of the universe makes the universe more open. It's not closed the way naturalism says that there's nothing happening. The sign of Jesus turning water into wine reveals the glory of God who is creating anew. Jesus is going to make all things new. He's come to make us new, to bring about lasting change in us. He's creating a new humanity who he's going to take as his bride. And it will conclude with an act of creating a new heavens and a new earth. There's something within all of us that longs for lasting, permanent change. There's something in us that wants to go beyond simply a self-help program to make some adjustments. We at a deep level want to be different people than we are. And that's what Jesus has come. That's what's being revealed as he turns water into wine. And there's just one more thing to see here in this strange conversation that Mary and Jesus has. Jesus is thinking about another wedding. And he's thinking about how he, as the groom, must provide for that wedding. How he's going to provide for the feast. How he's going to provide the wine for the wedding supper of the Lamb. And so this sign reveals the glory of Jesus, the groom, who's going to provide a rich, rich feast. John, at the end of his life, has this vision that we call the book of Revelation. And toward the end of it, he hears an angel speak to him. He says, "Write this, blessed are those who were invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb." Blessed means here, you don't want to miss this. You want your name on the list of who will be invited. Why? Well, because the new heavens and the new earth are going to be a place where there's no more death, where there's no more sickness, where there's no more grieving, where there's no injustice or unemployment or war or famine or cruelty or waste. Everything will be harmonious and whole as it was intended. And the truth is that every one of you, whether you're religious or not, whether you think of yourself as a person who is engaged in some kind of relationship with God. You long for this. There's something in us that rages when a child is born with birth defects, or a soldier doesn't come home, or a job is lost, or a loved one dies. There's something in us that, even though we know it's going to happen, that this person or that person is going to die, that just can't accept it. That the sense that it's wrong somehow remains with us. And the other clue that we long actually to be in this place, this new heavens and the new earth, is that we actually love stories that have a resolution. We love happy endings, where justice prevails and evil is defeated, where wrongs are righted. This makes emotional sense to us. That's why we love these stories. Because this is how reality ought to be. And we find dark and tragic endings ultimately unsatisfying, although they may resonate with us as somehow real, that bad things happen and there are no resolutions that we see. We long for this world, and it isn't wishful thinking. We're longing for something that's real, that we can't bring about. No matter how much we try to manage and prevent bad things from happening, how much we wish that everything was harmonious, we're not able to actually do that. Jesus is the groom at the feast who makes all things new. He's going to make this a reality. What do you have to do to be on the guest list? Wait, what do you have to do to share in the feast that's the opening of the new heavens and the new earth? Well, you have to embrace your need for cleansing. You have to come to terms with the fact that you need what Jesus has done on the cross in order to be in a right relationship with God. You have to face up to the fact that, well, you're just not good enough to be in God's presence. And unless you will trust that he's acted as your substitute, that he on the cross has taken what you deserve for your actions, for the evil that you perpetrated, you simply won't enter. If you're in a place where you see that this morning, then come to him. Ask him to cleanse you. Express your trust that he, in fact, has died in your place. Come to Jesus. Just come to him. Talk to him. Say, I need you. Now, if you're not sure how to do that and you want some help, it's not as complicated as it might sound. Just ask. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you. Maybe you're here with somebody who brought you, and you could ask them. But you don't have to wait. Now, if you're not sure who Jesus is, well, just come on back, and we'll keep looking at him together. Now, if you've done that, if you're confident that you're on the guest list, then here's some of the other things that this first and primary sign mean for you and me. This is the first one. Jesus cares about little stuff. He cares about the little things. You know, in the grand scheme of all things, a young couple running out of wine, it's just not that big a thing. That would have been big for them at the moment. But you know, a lot of life's like that. The other day I had some changes in my eyes. You know, well, people as they get older do have changes in their eyesight. You know, I was thinking, well, maybe I'm going to experience permanently some loss of sight. It's a real big thing to me, but, you know, to most people who didn't know me, care about me, just, well, that's just normal. But God cares about that. Jesus actually cares about that. What do you need to bring to him? And ask him to do. What concerns do you need to bring before him? Second thing here is we see faith. Mary exhibits really the nature of true faith here. She asks Jesus to do something. She doesn't know what he's going to do. She doesn't have any idea this is going to happen. But she knows there's something special, that God has set him apart for something unique. She is not anticipating this miracle. We don't know what she expects. He's resourceful. He's going to come up with something. He's going to take care of this. And then you know what she does? She just entrusts it to him. She just says in the sermons, do whatever he tells you to do at this point. You see, that's what faith is. Faith comes and asks boldly, and then it just releases. Now, I'm a lot better at the asking part than in the releasing and resting. part. But you see, Mary does both of these just beautifully. And if you're like me, that, well, you ask, but you're not so good at resting, then here's what you need to do. You need to look at what Jesus has done. He has, on the cross, cleansed you so that you can be in the presence of God. You know, when you can't rest, that's where you first need to go. You need to realize Jesus has done this. And then the second thing is you need to rest that Jesus has already begun creating anew, and he's done that in you. He has created, if you're in a relationship with Jesus, he's given you a new heart and a new mind and a new will. That's an extraordinary thing. That's one of the greatest miracles that's ever happened in human history, is that people who were dead and disconnected from God are raised to new life. And Jesus has already done what's necessary to put on the feast of the wedding supper of the Lamb. The third thing you need to do, and it just flows from that, is you need to fix your hope in the midst of life's misery and disappointments on this coming feast. There's a greater hope. There's a tremendous party coming where there's an abundance, where death itself is destroyed, where death will no longer hang over any of us. You will dine in the presence of God. You'll be God's guest. Just think about that. God wants you to be his guest, to have a meal with you. Would you rearrange your appointment calendar if he was going to have lunch with you later this week? How would you feel? That's what you need to set your hope on. And here's the last thing. Jesus is in the wedding business. That's what this means. Jesus is in the wedding business. He's not this dour, narrow killjoy who's just waiting for you to mess up in life. He's not, do this, do that. This is a demand you've got to meet. Here's another demand you've got to meet. No. Jesus is the life of the party. In fact, he throws the best parties. He brings the greatest amount and richest and finest of wines. And because he's in the wedding business, if you know him, he's decided that you get to help invite guests. You get to talk with people and help them understand that the picture they may have about Jesus isn't the real picture. Jesus is very different than they might imagine. Now, who's on the wedding guest is actually a secret. It's a closely guarded secret, and I don't have any insight into it. But I can tell you this, there are names on the list. And that means some of the people you invite to the feast will actually come. They'll respond. What a privilege. Not just to be invited to the feast, but to bring others along with you. Let's pray. Father, would you please enable us to grasp that Jesus is the master of the feast, the one who has set the table, the one alone who will satisfy us. Lord, grip us, and wherever we are in our relationship with you, however we need to walk this out, by your Spirit, enable us to do so this week.